cannibalism is among the most taboo subjects in modern Western society. However, cannibalism is not only found in countless species, but it has historically been known throughout many societies worldwide. Recognizing that our abhorrence to cannibalism is a cultural belief rather than a moral fact is important to understanding ourselves, other cultures, and even other species. First, we should look to the broader animal kingdom to gain an objective understanding of cannibalism. Cannibalism is a common ecological interaction in the animal kingdom. Over 1,500 species have been observed eating their own, with ours certainly being one of them. Cannibalism is exceptionally common in invertebrates, fish, and amphibians, and less so in birds and mammals. Spiders commonly participate in sexual cannibalism. Female spiders often consume their mates directly after mating. This provides females with a meal and also eliminates males as competition. Some species of shark eat their siblings in the womb, while bird chicks are known to eat the weaker sibling. Male lions and bears are known to eat the offspring of rival males. This eliminates competition, puts the females back into heat faster, and gives them a quick snack. As you can see, mammals are no more moral than the common house spider. Cannibalism in non-human primates is not common, but certainly occurs, notably in chimpanzees. Lethal violence within groups and with other groups is well documented in chimpanzees and in some cases includes cannibalism. Intergroup violence, which often consists of violence between neighboring communities, is the most common form of lethal violence. Communities constantly quarrel over their respective territories, and when food resources are common on territorial boundaries, fights frequently ensue. Often, lone females traveling with their young or groups of females are targeted by aggressive males. The females are attacked and separated from their young. The juveniles are then killed and commonly cannibalized. The infants are killed to weaken their enemies in the future and to scare them away from their territory. Consumption of the young may be a further display of disrespect and also obviously provides caloric benefits. The attacks are considered low risk on the part of the attacking chimpanzees because lone females are not very dangerous to aggressive males. The strategy is effective at weakening enemy groups and defending their territory. Cannibalistic behavior has also been observed within groups of chimpanzees. In 2013, chimpanzees in Senegal were observed killing their former leader after exiling him for over 5 years. While he lay dead, his former subordinates partially cannibalized him by consuming his throat and biting at his genitals. Though this individual was not technically part of their community, he once was, and his merciless killing and subsequent consumption are notable. In another instance of intergroup cannibalism, male chimpanzees at the Gombe National Park were twice seen attacking infants of females in the same group. One infant was killed and partially eaten. A similar event in Uganda consisted of a mother and her daughter eating 3 infants of the other females from the same community. Overall, cannibalism is certainly a behavior exhibited by chimpanzees in various contexts. Chimpanzees are some of our closest living relatives and have provided insight into the early evolution of social behavior. The existence and persistence of this behavior in extant hominids, including modern humans and chimpanzees, suggests that it may have been widespread in prehistory. Fortunately, the fossil record of our ancestors and close relatives can directly tell us about cannibalism during these distant periods. The oldest evidence of cannibalism in our genus comes from 800,000-year-old remains in Europe. The species in question is Homo antecessor, an archaic hominid species that likely descended from Erectus over 1 million years ago. These hominins were some of the first to colonize Western Europe. The cannibalism in question was discovered in the Gran Dolina cave of Spain's Atapuerca Mountains. Here, the remains of various individuals, mainly consisting of children, have been found with undeniable evidence of cannibalism. The flesh was cut from the bone with stone tools, and bones were smashed to access the nutritious marrow. Since Homo antecessor was the only species present in the region at this time, it was certainly cannibalism. Other remains present in the cave, such as deer, suggest that antecessor individuals and deer were butchered in a similar way. The bones were also both discarded on the floor of their living area. These similarities suggest that the hominins of Grandolina periodically hunted and consumed individuals from other groups. The age distribution of the victims suggests that juveniles were targeted in a similar manner to the behavior witnessed in chimpanzees. Vulnerable young were targeted due to its crippling effect on rival groups. Killing the young of another group would weaken their numbers and long-term ability to retaliate. These attacks are also low risk. A group of mature and aggressive males could easily overpower juveniles even if their mothers were present. These attacks may have been an essential aspect of the defense of resources and expansion of territory at the expense of rival groups. The subsequent cannibalism only makes sense. These individuals seem to have been hunted just like their usual prey of deer. Fatty rich brains and thick marrow-filled bones would have been very nutritious for cannibalistic antecessor communities. This strategy may seem quite grim, but undoubtedly effective. If your community wasn't engaging in this behavior, a community that was may kill your young, take your land, and drive you to starvation. This example may also be important for understanding the origins of warfare, but that is a topic for another day. Before mentioning other examples in prehistory, we should take a moment to talk about the classification of cannibalism. Cannibalism is classified based on the origin of consumed individuals and the purpose of consumption. The origin either comes from within a group, which would be known as endocannibalism, or from another group, which would be known as exocannibalism. The purpose of consumption can be divided into nutritional cannibalism, survival cannibalism, warfare cannibalism, and mortuary cannibalism. Nutritional cannibalism is, of course, the consumption of individuals as a form of sustenance. In this form, humans are typically treated the same way as the remains of other animals. Survival cannibalism is similar as it is done purely for nutrition, but in a setting that makes it necessary for survival. Warfare cannibalism is the consumption of enemies, which are typically young and adult males. The bodies may be regarded as trophies and may be ritually treated or seen as trash. Mortuary cannibalism can consist of ritual consumption of enemies or the consumption of members of the same group for spiritual reasons. The carcass can also be defleshed and dismembered and not necessarily eaten. This would leave evidence pretty similar to cannibalism, so it must be considered. Removing the flesh from a family or friend's carcass may have been a tactic to prevent attracting predators. Perhaps an essential practice in the carnivore-filled primeval past. With these categories, we can see that the cannibalism seen in Homo antecessor was likely warfare and nutritional exocannibalism. The young individuals were likely targeted to weaken neighboring communities, and since their bodies were treated similarly to other prey, it was likely nutritional rather than survival-based. Though cannibalism is often not black and white in these categories, they are useful for our understanding. The Homo antecessor remains from Grandolina is the earliest that we have evidence for, though they are very likely not the first time cannibalism was regularly occurring in our genus. Similar behaviors likely occurred in early Erectus and Habilis, though we just don't know. Various other cannibalized remains are known from the late Lower Paleolithic, though they are relatively scarce. One that stands out is the Bodo cranium. The Bodo cranium is a fossil hominin skull belonging to our line of Middle Paleolithic humans. There is debate over how it should be classified, but it has typically been classified as a member of Homo heidelbergensis. However, since this species classification is so broad, some want to classify African heidelbergensis as either Homo rhodesiensis or bodoensis. Regardless, what is important to understand is that it belongs to a line which are the direct ancestors of our species, Homo sapiens. For this reason, the cranium is very important as cranial elements from Africa during this time are quite rare. And interestingly, cut marks are present on the skull which may suggest mortuary cannibalism. The frontal bone, parietal bone, and zygomatic arc all have cut marks from a stone tool. These bones do not have much nutritional value, and it seems that the marks may have been made while removing the skin. The evidence is not consistent with ethnographic examples of nutritional cannibalism and is much more similar to mortuary defleshing. The skull may have been removed of its flesh to be used for display, or may have even been buried. The body and brain may have been defleshed and eaten, though we don't have other remains of this individual. Even 600,000 years ago, it seems that cannibalism may have had a deeper meaning than just nutrition or survival. Evidence for cannibalism in the Lower Paleolithic is exceedingly rare, though it would become more common in the Middle Paleolithic with Neandertals and modern humans. The oldest evidence of cannibalism from Neandertals comes from 120,000 years ago. At Molar in southeastern France, the remains of at least 6 cannibalized individuals have been found. 2 adults, 2 teenagers, and 2 children. Their flesh was cut and scraped from the bone, and their bones were smashed and thrown among the remains of their other prey. Before categorizing the cannibalism at Molar we must consider some other evidence. Around this time, the world was transitioning from MIS 6, a glacial period, to MIS 5, a much warmer interglacial period. Their world was becoming much warmer, but also drier. The wide open steppe environment became a patchwork of forest and grassland. Smaller prey species in smaller numbers lived in forest environments. With fewer massive herbivores to feed the mouths of hungry Neanderthals, many seem to have suffered malnutrition. This is evident by the thinner bands of enamel on several teeth from Molar cave. Though it is not always easy to correlate large-scale climatic changes to individual Neanderthal remains, what is certain is that these Neanderthals were having a hard time meeting their nutritional requirements. Only the remains of 6 individuals were cannibalized at the site, and subsequent layers of habitation don't include cannibalized remains. 2 authors of a 2019 paper about the site said, "The cannibalism highlighted at Molar is not a mark of bestiality or subhumanity. If anything, it's a gut-wrenchingly human story of hard choices in desperate times." This story has played out many times in recent human history, including people of moral faiths and just philosophies. At the end of the day, our bodies are made of food and many will choose survival. Another cave in northern Spain paints a grimmer picture. At El Sidrón cave, an exceptionally well-preserved assemblage of bones preserves the remains of 13 individuals. They include 3 adult males, 4 adult females, 3 adolescents, 2 juveniles, and 1 infant. Analysis of their mitochondrial DNA supports the hypothesis that the 13 individuals represent one cohesive family group. The bones are full of cut marks and had been smashed to bits. This family was almost certainly murdered and cannibalized by another group. The group only had 3 adult males, which may have been easily overpowered by a larger group. Even the adult men and women seem to have been quite young, as seen by the wear on their teeth. This group may have been purposefully targeted as a food source by a larger, stronger group. This example may classify as nutritional exocannibalism. The remains of this family also indicate that they had been suffering from nutritional stress for their entire lives. Their diet seems to have been made up of mostly plant seeds, tubers, and a small quantity of meat. They may have been targeted by another tribe that was also having trouble filling their stomachs. It is snapshots in time like this that can make prehistory so fascinating. Another site in Belgium has grisly evidence of Neanderthals being butchered. Through the cut marks present on the bones, it was determined that the upper limbs were disarticulated, the lower limbs were defleshed and smashed, and the chest was disemboweled among other smaller cuts. Their butchery was conducted in a very similar way to their normal prey of reindeer. Some Neanderthal bones were also used as retouchers to freshen up the edge of their stone tools. This example may paint quite a grim picture of Neanderthal cannibalistic brutes, though it does not necessarily paint an accurate picture. Though some of these sites almost certainly display nutritional and/or survival cannibalism, Overall, the high number of cut marks present on the cannibalized remains indicates that it was not a common practice. Neanderthals were expert butchers. If you have ever seen a video of a man filleting a fish in a few seconds, you can get a picture of how skilled they were at cutting up prey. If they were consuming other Neanderthals on a daily basis, we would see much fewer cut marks on these remains. Cannibalism would have been reserved mainly for starvation, but other possibilities exist. At the Croatian site of Krapina, many extraordinary Neanderthal discoveries have been found. One of them is Krapina 3. Krapina 3 is a well-preserved Neanderthal skull with strange cut marks present on its forehead. The cut marks are not consistent with butchery and are more likely associated with the symbolic peri-mortem manipulation of the dead. At least 35 marks were made on the forehead of this individual, likely at the same time. The purpose of this behavior cannot be attributed to cannibalism or defleshing. Many recent hunter-gatherer groups who participated in cannibalism or manipulation of the dead had very spiritual reasons for doing so. It is not unreasonable to hypothesize some deeper spiritual meaning behind this behavior. When talking about religion or spirituality in a people so distant, you must be very cautious. But our modern symbolic and ritual behaviors didn't come out of thin air. Just like any of our other behaviors, they developed slowly over a vast period of time. There are even indications of symbolic behavior in chimpanzees, such as so-called sacred trees or reacting strangely in the face of storms or wildfires. Some Neanderthals are known to have buried their dead. Family members that had died of natural causes may have been defleshed and eaten out of respect. Tribes in Papua New Guinea and Brazil were known to eat the flesh of their relatives to respect them and to gain their powers. Occasionally, in conflicts with others, their enemies were purposely left uneaten as a sign of disrespect. Some are known to dismember carcasses after death, but not to eat them. It is possible Neanderthals occasionally did something similar. Though we cannot speak in absolutes, the Krapina 3 skull indicates that cannibalism or defleshing rituals may have been performed for deeper reasons than just nutrition. Overall, Neanderthals certainly cannibalized each other from time to time, but it certainly wasn't common. Their cannibalism is actually remarkably similar to our own and unlike that of Homo antecessor or chimpanzees. Now we will talk about the evidence of cannibalism in our own species from the Upper Paleolithic onwards. Most of our evidence for cannibalism during the Upper Paleolithic and Mesolithic comes from Europe. The Magdalenian culture in particular, which existed from 17 to 12,000 years ago, are known to have utilized human remains. I say utilized because they not only butchered others, but often used their skulls as drinking vessels. At Go's Cave in the UK, all edible tissues were extracted from human remains and their skulls were modified into skull cups. One bone stands out from the rest. A radius was stripped of its flesh, engraved, chewed by human teeth, and then finally broken to extract its marrow. The sequence of manipulations suggests that a multi-stage cannibalistic ritual was performed. The abstract markings strongly suggest a symbolic connotation. Magdalenian populations likely had cannibalistic rituals similar to contemporary cannibalistic cultures. Other sites of cannibalism are known from the Upper Paleolithic and Mesolithic, though examples get much more interesting in the Neolithic. The city of Jericho is claimed to be the oldest city in the world. It was first inhabited before agriculture over 11,000 years ago by Natufian hunter-gatherers. With the eventual adoption of agriculture around 1,000 years later, the city grew larger and a sedentary lifestyle emerged. With it, a new mortuary practice. Family members would be buried under their mud brick houses. Sometimes the entire body would be buried, while, more often, their heads would be removed and only the skull was buried. The skull was defleshed and the mandible was removed. Then, plaster and paint was used to recreate facial features. Often, shells were inlaid in the eye sockets while hair was stuck on. It is unclear if the flesh of their loved ones was consumed, though it is clear that the primary purpose of butchery was to preserve the skull. This example was extraordinary because it is quite clear that the butchery of their dead was clearly done out of compassion. Another Neolithic site from Germany preserves something quite different. The German site of Herxheim dates back to between 7,300 and 6,900 years ago. It contains at least 80 pits which contain the remains of at least 500 individuals ranging from infant to elderly. Many of the bones, particularly their skulls, were butchered and broken by stone tools after death. The site likely represents a ritual mortuary center or necropolis. The site is part of the linear pottery culture, a widespread culture of Central Europe during this time. Pottery and flint found at Herxheim were transported as far as 500 kilometers or 310 miles from other sites in Europe. It is likely that the dead were too. They were brought here, butchered, eaten, pulverized, and then buried. It is important to note that these people do not seem to have been encountering significant nutritional stress or starvation. The cannibalism does not seem to have been done out of desperation. This example is interesting because it is from a much larger interconnected Neolithic culture. People from across Neolithic Central and Eastern Europe seem to have seen cannibalism in a symbolic light. Other Neolithic sites across Spain and France contain remains that were cannibalized or defleshed. Some, such as Fontbourgois Cave in southeastern France, preserves evidence that may be more indicative of complex mortuary rituals than nutritional cannibalism. Though this video is mainly about cannibalism that occurred in prehistory, I think it is important that we cover some historical examples as well to put it all into perspective. Cannibalism has been done by virtually every culture and people for a variety of reasons. I will be covering various examples that I found interesting or important. There are far too many to all cover. Cannibalism was quite common in Greek mythology, but it was not practiced by the Greeks. The Greek historian Herodotus claims that the Isodones, a people from Central Asia, practiced ritual cannibalism. According to Herodotus, they practiced ritual cannibalism on their elderly males. When a man's father died, he was butchered along with cattle, which would make a large feast to honor him. Perhaps this practice descended from earlier European cultures that practiced ritual cannibalism, such as at Herxheim. One of Hannibal's officers once suggested that he should have his army adopt cannibalism as a way to stay supplied during their travel to Italy. Apparently, Hannibal and his men could not bring themselves to actually partake in the act. The Romans themselves were known to drink the blood of slain gladiators to absorb their vitality and strength. In China during the Tang Dynasty, cannibalism occurred among soldiers and civilians. The rebel forces in the early period were said to have raided neighboring villages for victims to eat. Eating an enemy's heart and liver was also an official punishment within the Tang Dynasty. Cannibalism is reported from many sieges across history. Sieges were not always massive battles, but more often than not, blockades that starved the defenders into submission. Reports of cannibalism are known to have occurred in the First Crusade, such as following the siege of Molar. The reports terrified the Christians as well as their enemies. Several neighboring cities heard of these accounts, and it may have persuaded them to surrender. Cannibalism was not very common across the ancient or medieval world, but famines would occasionally force some to partake. One very strange cannibalistic trend starting in the 12th century was mummia. Mummia was originally referred to as a type of resinous bitumen found in Western Asia. The practice started in the Near East in traditional Islamic medicine. Mummia literally translated to bitumen, though the Latins mistranslated mummia to refer to both a bituminous medicine from Persia and to actual mummies. The use of this natural bitumen spread throughout Europe. Eventually, supplies of bitumen ran short and mummia was replaced with the black residues scraped from embalmed Egyptian mummies. However, only so much of this material could be scraped out of a mummy. The Egyptians turned to grinding up entire carcasses of mummies to sell as mummia. The medicine was an entirely different substance from actual mummia, and it is even funnier to think that neither of them even worked in the first place. Eventually, by the 16th century, Egypt was running low on mummies and banned the shipment of this drug. the Europeans turned to sell the embalmed remains of fresh corpses. Finally, during the Renaissance, scholars proved that the translation was a mistake and physicians stopped prescribing the drug. Imagine being the scholar who found out that everyone was eating human remains because of a mistranslation. It is universally agreed that various Native American cultures practiced cannibalism prior to European arrival. However, there is debate about how widespread it actually was. When Columbus first landed in the Caribbean, he reported that the natives were friendly, though he heard reports that some were cannibals. Queen Isabel had forbidden the Spaniards from enslaving the indigenous, and thus they were guilty of cannibalism. So of course, cannibalism became a pretext for attacks on natives and a justification for their enslavement. This is why claims of cannibalism from European sources must be looked at with much scrutiny. Though credible reports of cannibalism are known throughout the New World. Across many Native American cultures, pieces of enemy flesh were consumed after a victorious warrior killed them in battle. The Mohawk, Tonkawa, Atacapa, and other Texas tribes were known as the man-eaters by neighboring tribes. They practiced cannibalism in times of famine and occasionally in rituals. Cannibalism seems to have occurred in Mesoamerica, though to a questionable degree. Some, such as anthropologist Marvin Harris, suggest that victims were consumed by aristocrats to make up a substantial part of their diet. Others believe that cannibalism was not executed in a systematic manner whatsoever. Various reports from Mesoamerica claim that humans were casually consumed throughout some towns. Butcher shops with human remains and humans in cages were reported by Bernal Diaz. In South America, specifically Brazil, there are reports of cannibalism among the Tupinamba. In the Pacific, the first encounter between the Europeans and the Maori ended with the cannibalism of a Dutch sailor. The last expedition of French explorer Marion de Fresnay ended when he and his crew were killed and eaten by the Maori. Another instance saw 66 European travelers eaten. The American whaling ship known as the Essex was sunk thousands of miles off the Pacific Ocean by a sperm whale in 1820. The men salvaged what they could and hopped in their whaling boats and created a makeshift sail. The officers determined that the Marquesas were the first known islands, which were over 1,900 kilometers or 1,200 miles away. Though the crew was afraid that cannibals may live on those islands and voted to sail back towards South America. Even with the knowledge that this route would take twice the time to travel, they set off towards South America. Ironically, 7 out of the 15 remaining crew were cannibalized before the last 8 were rescued. A similar story played out during the British expedition known as Franklin's Lost Expedition. There are many other cases of cannibalism from this period, but for the sake of time, let's skip to the 20th century Soviet Union. Cannibalism was widespread throughout the various famines of the 1920s and 30s. A doctor in Ukraine wrote a letter that said, "Survival was a moral as well as physical struggle. The good people died first. Those who refused to steal or prostitute themselves died. Those who gave food to others died. Those who refused to eat corpses died. Those who refused to kill their fellow man died." 2,500 people in Ukraine were sentenced for cannibalism from 1932 to 1933. World War II wouldn't make anything better for Eastern Europe. Cannibalism happened on a mass scale during World War II, perhaps the most frequent at any time in world history. During the siege of Leningrad, over 3 million people were deliberately starved by the Nazis. The siege lasted 872 days and resulted in the death of up to 1.5 million and the evacuation of 1.4 million, many of which died of starvation as well. NKVD files report 13 specific cases, which include a mother smothering her own baby to feed her other 3 children. Another instance saw a man kill his wife to feed his sons and nieces. That is about as dark as it gets. The NKVD arrested over 2,100 cannibals in Leningrad alone. However, given the scope of the starvation, cannibalism was quite rare. Most preferred to murder for ration cards. Around 100,000 people were dying in Leningrad a month. In the Pacific Theater, cannibalism was conducted in a systematic and sanctioned manner by the Japanese Empire. Prisoners of war were used to feed entire squads under the command of officers. In some cases, the flesh was cut from living people. A POW from the British Indian Army, Lance Nai Katam Ali, said that in New Guinea, the Japanese started selecting prisoners, and every day, one prisoner was taken out and killed and eaten by the soldiers. I personally saw this happen, and about 100 prisoners were eaten at this place by the Japanese. Those selected were taken to a hut where their flesh was cut from their bodies while they were alive, and they were thrown into a ditch where they later died. It is quite shocking how common this behavior was in the Imperial Japanese Army. Various other examples of cannibalism are known throughout parts of Africa. The Leopard Society was a cannibalistic society that originated in Sierra Leone in the late 1800s. It was believed that they could transform into leopards through witchcraft. They would dress in leopard skins and attack passing travelers with claw-like weapons. Their victim's corpse would then be butchered and given to their tribe, which is thought to have provided them with strength. Another case from Africa included Joshua Milton Blai, better known by his pseudonym, General Butt Naked. General Butt Naked is a preacher, writer, and former warlord from Liberia. During the First Liberian Civil War, he led a group of soldiers which fought on the side of the rebel group. His soldiers were known as the Naked-based Commandos because they did not wear clothing when they fought. They were known to commit numerous atrocities including child sacrifice and cannibalism. General Butt Naked eventually gave up his way of life and found Jesus, but he said that his victims numbered as many as 20,000. Another unbelievable example from Africa comes from Jean Bedel Bokassa. The self-declared emperor of the Central African Empire has been tried for several acts of cannibalism and murder. In 1979, elementary school students were arrested for protesting against wearing expensive uniforms to school. Bokassa allegedly took part in a massacre of these students where over 100 were killed. He allegedly personally beat some to death with his cane and proceeded to eat some of their remains. Somehow he was cleared of all charges in 1989. Many of the cases mentioned should be considered different from legitimate cultural cannibalism. Some cases of ritual or mortuary cannibalism are done consensually in good faith. Papua New Guinea is one of the last places where cannibalism has been widely practiced. Cannibalism is practiced for a number of reasons. The most common form is the consumption of loved ones. This would be considered mortuary endocannibalism. The belief is that it is much better for the body to be eaten by loved ones than by maggots or worms. It has been reported that many Papuans would personally request this funeral before death. At funerals, the bodies were cooked and primarily fed to adult women as they are thought to have been the best choice to house a spirit. Cannibalism also often occurred during times of war. Fallen enemies were seen as a food source. Their cannibalistic practices led to the spread of dangerous prions. Consuming prion-contaminated tissue severely deteriorates the brain and can be fatal in a matter of months. The funerary practices of these people quickly led to the death of many young women and their children, which they also fed human remains to. Fortunately, it was discovered what was causing the deadly disease that the Papuans called kudu, and the practice was mostly discontinued. However, isolated tribes may still partake in the practice to some extent. A local cannibal cult was known to kill and eat victims as late as 2012. The Wari people of Brazil were known to practice ritual cannibalism of the deceased. Once a family member had passed away, the family would gather from other villages. The body would sit for 3 days and start to decompose before being cooked and eaten. The Wari believed that their relative's soul can live on if their body is consumed by their relatives. It was an essential practice to help their families relieve their grief. The Wari eventually stopped this practice and now bury their dead. Though a world away from each other, the Wari and some Papuans both developed the practice of eating their dead out of respect. These examples have many parallels with the remains found at Herxheim and even possibly older sites such as Gull's Cave and Krapina. Though cannibalism is wholly objected to by our modern cultures, it is clear that our species has practiced it for thousands of years. By suspending our cultural beliefs, we can see that cannibalism is not inherently wrong. Some forms of cannibalism, such as criminal cannibalism, can be considered some of the most vile behavior one can exhibit, though other forms can be a poetic way to carry on the life of the beloved. The goal of anthropology is to pursue a holistic understanding of what it means to be human. Understanding how different cultures approach this behavior can provide us with valuable perspectives about their beliefs and can even help us evaluate our own. I personally love this topic because it has helped me identify how strong my own cultural bias can be. Though if I was born in Central Europe 7,000 years ago, I may have honored my late grandfather by gnawing on his femur. It is interesting to think that my ancestors may have actually been at the site of Herxheim eating loved ones. The odds are, most if not all of us descend from cannibals. Humans are fascinating. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. This has been your host Northo2, and I'll see you on the next one. See ya.